We're continuing going over Hadith terminology in the very famous and prestigious book Nukhbat Al-Fikar by the very famous and prestigious Imam Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah ta'ala. And we reached Khatima, the epilogue, meaning something attached to the end of the book. He says, وَمِنَ الْمُهِمِّ مَعْرِفَةُ طَبَقَاتِ الرُّوَاةِ. Among the important topics in hadith terminology is knowing the levels of the narrators, knowing the levels, the tabaqat. So there are levels. For example, the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, that's a level. And the Tabi'un, the followers of the companions, that's a level. And Atba'u Tabi'in, the followers of the followers, that's a level. Not just that, but even the companions themselves have levels. The level of the companions has levels. Because there are As-Sabiqun Al-Awwalun, the first ones who embraced Islam in the early days of Mecca, that's a level. And the first believers from the Ansar, that's a level. And companions who fought in battles with the Prophet ﷺ, that's a level. And those who were youngsters amongst the companions, for example, Abu Bakr, he was the Prophet's age. But what about Anas ibn Malik? He was a youngster. And Ibn Abbas, he was a youngster. Those, when the Prophet died, ﷺ, Ibn Abbas might have been 13 years old or something. So that's a level. So among the important topics is knowing the levels of the narrators. وَمَوَالِيدِهِمْ, and knowing their birth dates. وَوَفَيَاتِهِمْ, and their death dates. وَبُلْدَانِهِمْ, and their towns. Where were they from? وَأَحْوَالِهِمْ, and their situations. تَعْدِيلًا وَتَجْرِيحًا وَجَهَالًا, whether they were accredited narrators or discredited narrators or unknown narrators. وَمَرَاتِبُ الْجَرْحِ, and among the important topics is knowing the ranks of negative criticism. The ranks, I'm just going to say criticism though, but I mean negative criticism. The ranks of criticizing the narrators. وَأَسْوَأُهَا الْوَصْفُ بِأَفْعَالٍ, and the worst ranking, the worst criticism of a narrator is a description put forth in the superlative. The superlative. كَأَكْذَبِ النَّاسِ, like the most lying of people. That's superlative. Akdhab, most lying. The biggest liar. So that type of criticism is the worst type, to have the superlative. Superlative means, you know how you say good, but then you say better, and then you say best? So that's superlative. Better is superior to good, and best is superior to better. For example, you say worse, you say worst with a T, worse, S-E, worse, and worst with a T. Worst is more than worse. That's superlative. So the worst description for a narrator is what has a superlative. Ka'akdhabi nas, like the most lying of people, the biggest liar amongst the people. Thumma dajjal, and then to call a narrator an imposter. Oh wada', or a fabricator. Oh kadhab, or mendacious, yani a big liar. وأسهلها, and the lightest negative criticism. The lightest negative criticism is layyin. Yani he's lenient. He's lenient. That means he's not careful enough. He doesn't put enough effort. He's lenient. So that's a negative criticism. Oh, sayyi'ul hifz, or he has a bad memory. He might not be a bad person, but he doesn't memorize well. Oh, fihi maqal, or to say there's something to say about him. There's something to say about that one. So that's a negative criticism. And this talk is lawful, it's not haram. There are reports about people who even told the scholars of hadith not to talk like this. And the scholars of hadith would stand their ground and say, this is necessary. This is needed for protecting the Muslims and protecting the religion. وَمَرَاتِبُ تَعْدِيل, and the ranks of accreditation, validation, validating a narrator, that's among the important topics also. وَأَرُفَعُهَا, and the highest of them is al-wasfu bi-af'al, is being described with a superlative also, كَأَوْثَقِ النَّاسِ, like the most trusted of people, or the trustworthiest of people, or most reliable of people. ثُمَّ مَا تَأَكَّدَ بِصِفَةٍ أَوْ صِفَتَيْنِ, and then what comes after that is what is reiterated by a description or two, like ثِقَةٌ ثِقَةٌ, trustworthy, trustworthy, or ثِقَةٌ حَافِظٌ, trustworthy headmaster, trustworthy hadith headmaster, just calling him a hadith headmaster, a hafiz. That in itself is an accreditation. But calling him a trustworthy hadith headmaster, then that has emphasis in it. And I'm saying hadith headmaster. Why I'm saying that, remember, the people of hadith are three levels. You have musnid, he's just a conveyor, doesn't have to be a scholar, but he may have taken books of hadith properly, and then he can convey from himself back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with his own chains properly. Like, imagine, for example, if that's what we were doing. If I, instead of what we do teach, if I had hadith books and I knew their chains and I could just read them to you, doesn't make me a scholar, but it's a valid transmission. So you have musnid, that's the lowest level of the people of hadith. And then you have muhaddith, we're going to call that one hadith scholar. Hadith scholar. Muhaddith, as far as translation is concerned. And then you have above the hadith scholar, hafiz. So I'm calling that one, for translation purposes, headmaster, hadith headmaster. Because in academic terms, the headmaster, he's the top scholar, the top educator, like the principal. وَأَدْنَاهَا, and the lowest accreditation. So it means accredited, verified, narrator, but not high level. The lowest accreditation is مَا أَشْعَرَ بِالْقُرْبِ مِنْ أَسْهَلِ تَجْرِيحٍ, what makes you feel that it's close to the lightest criticism. The lightest criticism. كَشَيْخ, like sheikh. So just to call him sheikh, We're talking about hadith narration here. What we do, we're not usually busy in hadith narration. So we're talking about in the chain, someone was called Sheikh. So if someone in the chain is called Sheikh, then that's not high level accreditation, low tier accreditation. وتقبل التزكية من عارف بأسبابها, and accreditation of a narrator is accepted from someone who knows its reasons, who knows what validates the accolade, yani, what validates that accreditation. Not from anyone. You have to be careful there, because someone would say, you know, some people think that people are trustworthy and they're not. Some people think that people are qualified when they're not. So you have people, for example, praying the wrong direction, and then someone comes and validates him because he's not a Wahhabi. Then this one doesn't know the reasons for accreditation. So his tazkiyah, his accrediting the narrator, is not valid, is not accepted. ولو من واحد على الأصح, even if it came from a single accreditor, according to what's most accurate. Doesn't have to be two who verify him. If one person who knows what warrants, that's the word I was looking for, what warrants, who knows what warrants accreditation, accredits a narrator, then that's sufficient to take. We don't have to look for a second one to accredit him or to accredit him or verify him. والجرح مقدم على التعديل إن صدر مبينا من عارف بأسبابه. And criticism is given priority over accreditation. The discrediting has priority over the accrediting. Not absolutely, as opposed to what some said. Some said absolutely, yes. But Ibn Hajar is not saying absolutely. He's saying, no, not absolutely, then when, if it is clarified, but by someone who knows what warrants it. If it's clarified by someone who knows what warrants this criticism. And I'll remind you here, all what we're taking now, we're not hafiz of hadith. So is this knowledge even useful for us? It is useful for us. Because even though you're not a hadith headmaster, still, you can take these for what they're worth, and you can use them and you can apply them. So that means when you encounter someone who doesn't know what warrants accrediting and discrediting, then because you've learned this, you have yani, knowledge that you've learned, then you apply your knowledge. Say, this guy doesn't even know what he's talking about. To be validating someone or invalidating someone. Or you might validate or invalidate someone because you know what warrants it. Or you might refrain from validating or invalidating someone because you don't know what warrants it, because you've learned. So there's usefulness for us there. Not to mention that, inshallah, you're going to continue to learn and continue to learn and continue to learn. You're just going to be building on what you know and getting better at it, inshallah. More proficient. فإن خلا عن التعديل قُبِلَ مجملا على المختار. Now, we just said the negative criticism has priority over the accreditation if someone who knows what warrants that criticism clarifies the criticism. Not just that he criticized them, no, he clarifies it. But this sentence here that we just got out of, وَالْجَرْحُ مُقَدَّمٌ عَلَى التَّعْدِيلِ إِنْ صَدَرَ مُبَيَّنًا مِنْ عَارِفٍ بِأَسْبَابِهِ. The criticism has priority over the accreditation here. In order for the criticism to have priority over the accreditation, that means there must have been an accreditation. So you see how a person might not understand something? See how something could go over someone's head? There must have been an accreditation here. This sentence necessarily implies that there was a negative criticism and there was a validation. Both of them were present. So which one has priority? The negative criticism has priority over the accreditation, but not absolutely, if it was clarified by someone who knows what warrants it. فَإِنْ خَلَى عَنِ التَّعْدِيلِ. So if there were no accreditation, there's only criticism of the narrator, قُبِلَ, then that's accepted. مُجْمَلًا, in general, عَلَى الْمُخْتَارِ, according to what's chosen. Why? Because there's nothing to offset it. There's no accreditation to offset that criticism. There's only criticism. So then it will be accepted according to what's chosen. Fasl, section. وَمِنَ الْمُهِمِّ مَعْرِفَةُ كُنَى الْمُسَمَّيْنِ. And amongst what is important is knowing the kunyas of those who are named. Knowing the kunyas of those who are named. The kunya is like Abu Fulan or Fulan. And for your information, the norm of the Arabs was to name one, to give one a kunya after the first son. So if you have if a girl's your first child, then you could be given a kunya after your daughter. But then if you get a son, then your kunya will be the name of you will be named after your first son, according to the Arab culture. So even if you had so many girls, but then you got a boy, you're going to be named after your first son. You're going to be Abu Fulan, whatever is the name of your son, your first son. Someone, his name might be then, according to that, Abu Adam, for example, Rahimahullah, or the like. That's his first son. And also, among the important matters is knowing the names of those who have kunyas. Because your kunya is not necessarily your given name. So, amongst what's important, وَمِنَ الْمُهِمْ مَعْرِفَةُ كُنَى الْمُسَمَّيْنِ, is knowing the kunya. Kunya is the name that starts with Abu or father of or mother of. Is knowing the kunyas of those who have given names. So one's name might be Abdullah, for example. That's his given name. But everybody calls him Abu Bakr. That's his kunya. And knowing the given names of those who have kunyas. That's important too. وَمَنْ اسْمُهُ كُنْيَتُهُ, and knowing those whom their given name is a kunya. So he was literally named something. She was Katha or Abu Katha. And you could have a kunya without having a child. Your kunya could be a nickname, or your nickname could be a kunya. Like Ali ibn Abi Talib, he had a kunya the Prophet gave him, which was a nickname, Abu Turab. When Ali and Fatima had a problem between themselves, so Ali left the house, and as I remember, he was in the masjid and he was sleeping on the ground. Subhanallah, subhanallah, subhanallah. And then the Prophet saw him like that, and he had the soil, the dirt on him, on his body. So the Prophet called him Abu Turab. So that's a nickname, but it's in the form of a kunya. In Arabic, you have three types of names. If you're following in our Nahu classes on Saturday, we'll come to that soon, inshallah. Names. So you have three types of names. You have a given name, that's called ism. a given name, and you have a nickname, a laqab, and then you have also a kunya. There is a word for that in English, but I never remember it. So it's important to know all of these scenarios when you're dealing with hadiths. وَمَنْ اخْتُلِفَ فِي كُنْيَتِهِ, and knowing who they differed about what his kunya is. Having that knowledge too is important. وَمَنْ كَفُرَتْ كُنَاهِ, and it's important to know who has many kunyas. أو نُعُوتُهُ, or he has many descriptions. وَمَنْ وَافَقَتْ كُنْيَتُهُ اسْمَ أَبِيهِ أو بالعكس, or also what's important is knowing whose kunya matches his father's kunya or his father's name, and vice versa. So let's see the example he said. Knowing whose kunya agrees with his father's name, like Abu Ishaq. So Abu Ishaq, father of Ishaq. That's a kunya. So his name is Ibrahim. And this Ibrahim, he is Ibn Ishaq, because usually the kunya comes first. They have rules about what if you have a given name, a nickname, and a kunya? How would you arrange that? Inshallah, we'll learn that on our Saturday lessons in the Nahu. So here, Abu Ishaq, that's his kunya, but his given name is Ibrahim. He's Ibrahim, son of Ishaq. So Abu Ishaq is Ibn Ishaq. Abu Ishaq is Ibn Ishaq. Abu means father of, Ibn means son of. So knowing the likes of this, that's also important. We'll see more details when we read the explanation, inshallah. Or the reverse of that, O kunyatuhu kunyata zawjatihi, or whose kunya is also his wife's kunya, like Abu Salama and Salama. You know Salama, the Prophet's wife? Before she was married to the Prophet, before Salama was married to the Prophet, she was married to Abu Salama, whose kunya is also his wife's kunya. Among what is important also is to know whose kunya is like his wife's kunya, وَمَنْ نُسِبَ إِلَى غَيْرِ أَبِيهِ, and also knowing who is attributed to other than his father. Who's attributed to other than his father? Does anyone know a very, 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 very famous scholar who's attributed to other than his father? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Who's Hanbal? Hanbal is his grandfather. It's not his father. I forgot his father's name though. And we'll see whatever Ibn Hajar has for us in that topic in the explanation when we get to it, inshallah ta'ala. أو إلى غير ما يسبق إلى الفهم, or yani, also important is knowing who is attributed to or affiliated with something that subverts expectation. It subverts expectation. Yani, it's different from what you would think it is. So, for example, someone would be called Al-Hadha, shoemaker. And then you'd think he's a shoemaker, so that's why they called him that. And they called him that because he hung with the shoemakers, for example, not because he was one. So it subverts your expectation. That's also important. وَمَنِ اتَّفَقَ اسْمُهُ وَاسْمُ أَبِيهِ وَجَدِّهِ, and important is knowing whose name is the same as his father's name and his grandfather's name. Like if there's someone whose name is Muhammad, son of Muhammad, son of Muhammad, or Ahmed, son of Ahmed, son of Ahmed. أو اسم شيخه وشيخ شيخه فالصاعدة. Or, for example, his name agrees with his sheikh's name and the sheikh of his sheikh. So the student has, his name is Muhammad, and the sheikh's name is Muhammad, and the sheikh's name is Muhammad, for example. فصاعدا, and so on. That's another important case. ومن اتفق اسم شيخه والراوي عنه. And also knowing whose name happens to be the name of his sheikh and the name of his student. So that's like the previous case. Previous case is his name is the name of his sheikh and his sheikh's sheikh. This case here is that his name is the name of his sheikh and the name of his student. So he's in the middle. ومعرفة الأسماء المجردة, and important is knowing the names that are particular to something, like the men who are in the chains in Sahih al-Bukhari in particular, or knowing the names of the men who are in Bukhari and Muslim. And don't forget, when we say men, that's only a terminology. So the hadith terminology is rijal, men, but it includes the women. So don't be a feminist there. That's just a terminology. Those are men and women, but they call them al-rijal, the men of the chains, the men of al-Bukhari and the men of Muslim, etc. And that includes knowing, for example, the names of weak narrators. That's similar case. Just only weak narrators. And also knowing the unique names, al-mufradah, knowing the unique names. Like there's someone whose name is Sughdi. There's someone whose name is Sughdi. So some scholars, they said this one, he has a unique name. But others, they differed. They said, no, there's another Sughdi also. So knowing that topic is also an important one. Wal-kuna wal-alqab wal-ansab, and it's important to know the kunyas and knowing the nicknames, the alqab. The nickname is the name that is for praise or dispraise. Like for someone to be named Zainul Abidin, the decor of the worshippers. That's his nickname, the decor of the worshippers. Zainul Abidin. So that's a praise. Or his nickname might be Anfunaqa, camel nose. Hey, ain't nobody seen camel nose? I remember I grew up, there was a guy around my way named Musi. They called him Musi because he had a big bottom lip. And al-ansab, and knowing the lineages, yani who's the lineage that's in your name. So you might be, let's see, what does he have there? Well, ansab, yeah, because you might be attributed to a tribe or a town. So the ansab, the lineages. But taqa'u ila al-qaba'il, that would go to the tribes like Qurashi, from the tribe of Quraysh. And the awtan, the nations, whether it's a biladan, city, or diya'an, or some district, or borough, or sikakan, or what's the sikak? A road, a street, like Lancaster Ave, Washington Ave. So somebody might be named after a street. Oh, mujawara. So mujawara means any vicinity or neighborhood or something like that. I'm not sure exactly though. What does he mean here? I just know the word. Wa ila sana'i' wal hiraf, also a person, he could be attributed to his job or his profession. So he uh, could be hadha, like we said, shoemaker, or he could be shorti, policeman, fulan the cop. ويقع فيها الاتفاق والاشتباه كالأسماء. And these things also are subject to what we talked about previously, الاتفاق والاشتباه, yani being similar, being close to another name. It could be spelled the same as another name, but the harakat are different, or the shape of the word is of the two names are the same, but the dots are different. We talked about that. This applies here too. وَقَدْ تَقَعُ أَلْقَابًا. And these things could be just merely nicknames. وَمَعْرِفَةُ أَسْبَابِ ذَلِكَ. And also it's important to know the reasons for these names. وَمَعْرِفَةُ الْمَوَالِي. And it's important to know the alliances, the people who are named because of an alliance that they have. Min a'la wa min asfal. Yani, so for example, you might, let's say, because you have a status, then you might take someone under your wing. So it's like you are the patron, and he's like, you know, someone under you. So he'd be attributed to you. Or vice versa, could be that you're attributed to him because you're over him. So you need to know all of those. All of that's important. بالرق أو بالحلف could be that that's such an alliance because of slavery. Like you freed a slave, and now he's attributed to you since you're his liberator. Or you gave someone safety, and you gave someone allegiance, a promise of support. So if he needs you, you roll out for him, for example, or you'll protect him if he needs it. And so a name developed from there. So it's important to know that. وَمَعْرِفَةُ الْإِخْوَةِ وَالْأَخَوَاتِ. And also amongst what is important is knowing the brothers and sisters who are siblings of whom. وَمَعْرِفَةُ آدَابِ الشَّيْخِ وَالطَّالِبِ. And knowing also what's important is knowing the mannerisms of the sheikh and the mannerisms of the student. وَسِنِّ التَّحَمُّلِ وَالْأَدَاءِ. And also important is knowing وَسِنُّ التَّحَمُّلِ وَالْأَدَاءِ. Knowing the age of reception. How old does one have to be to start hearing the hadiths? وَالْأَدَاءِ. And the age of conveyance. How old does one have to be to convey the hadiths? وَصِفَةِ كِتَابَةِ الْحَدِيثِ. And knowing how to write the hadith. Just knowing how to write it. They have conventions for those things. If we ever got to Alfiya al-Iraqi, which would be, mashallah, if we did that, it would be a great feat. He goes into details there. Stuff I haven't reviewed in many years. I really would love to get to. They have conventions there on how to write the hadiths, what to do, what did they used to do in the old days when they were first writing the hadiths, and how to develop, and what do you do if there's something missing in your copy? How do you add it? Do you squeeze it in between the lines? Do you write it in the margin, or what? And one thing I'll tell you really quick that the scholars mentioned was, if someone's name is Abdullah ibn such and such, Abdullah ibn such and such, then, so what if you were writing and then at the end of a line you wrote Abdu, and then at the beginning of the next line you wrote Allah, and then after that is Ibn. So it looks like you wrote there on that line, Allah, the son of so-and-so. Of course, that's not what you're saying. You're saying Abdullah, the son of so-and-so, but the word Abdullah got broke. Abd is at the end of the previous line, and the name Allah is on the beginning of the next line. So the scholars, they even paid attention to that. They said, don't do it. So if you find it broken like that, just write Abdullah on the next line. Don't put it so that it looks like you're saying Allah, the son of. All those types of things are very beneficial for you. They make you so aware of things that you didn't even realize. Not just there. It doesn't stop there. If you understand this knowledge, that's just a seed for you there. And then from there, you're going to have knowledge and wisdom. That's the benefit and the blessing of the religious knowledge. And you'll be writing something one day, and because you have knowledge, you're going to say, I'm not going to write it that way. No one would even know because they don't have knowledge. And how to present the hadith. And how to hear it. And how to make it heard. And traveling to learn it. Traveling for hadiths. You know that it's famous that Muslim scholars were travelers. What do you do? Whether you're learning hadith or just the knowledge, what do? You exhaust, first of all, the knowledge of your own town. Why are you moving to the next town? You didn't exhaust the knowledge in your town. First, you exhaust the knowledge in your town. Then, which means in your own town, you went from sheikh to sheikh to sheikh. You took everything they could give you. Then, when you're done with them, then you go where? All the way across the ocean? You go to the next town. Assuming that that's available for you. That's how it would go. And like that, you go, exhausting them from town to town. وَتَصْنِيفِهِ and knowing the different ways hadith books are authored. عَلَى الْمَسَانِيد, like musnads. Those are hadith books that are arranged according to the companions who narrated the hadiths, not according to the subject matter of the hadith. So when you look into a hadith book that's a musnad, then you're going to be looking through the hadiths of Abu Bakr, the hadiths of Umar, the hadiths of Uthman, the hadiths of Ali. And since they're arranged in this way, then the subject matters of these hadiths are going to be all mixed up. So when the Wahhabi comes to you talking about Musnad Ahmad, don't think he's knowing very much what he's talking about. Good chance that he's a parrot. Musnad Ahmad is arranged according to the companions who narrated the hadiths, not the subjects of the hadiths. That means that the subjects are scattered all over the place in there. So just because he's throwing some names out, don't think he knows what he's talking about necessarily. Or hadith books that are arranged according to chapters. So then it's going to be all the hadiths about wudu, all the hadiths about ghusl, all the hadiths about tayammum, all the hadiths about marriage, etc., etc. Or the hadith books about the defects in the hadiths. A scholar might compile a hadith book just for defective hadiths. Atraf, or the hadith index books, where they just put the beginning of a hadith, the first words of hadith, and then they don't give you the whole hadith, and then they'll tell you everywhere where you can find this hadith. So scholars were doing that centuries ago without computers. Just their minds were like that. Some of those scholars, when I read their books, it's like Suyuti, for example, it's like his mind is a computer to me, just from how good he can arrange his information and go from one subject to the next subject. Very, very nice. As if he has Microsoft Word and he can shift paragraphs around until he puts them into a perfect sequence. But he's doing it without a computer, really. وَمَعْرِفَةُ سَبَبِ الْحَدِيثِ, and knowing the reasons for the hadith, the stories behind the hadiths. That's important to know. وقد صنف فيه بعض شيوخ القاضي أبي يعلى بن الفراء Some sheikhs of Judge Abu Ya'la ibn al-Farra have authored in that issue. وَصَنَّفُوا فِي غَالِبِ هَذِهِ الْأَنْوَاعِ. The scholars have authored books that address most of these topics. وَهِيَ نَقْلٌ مَحْضٌ ظَاهِرَةُ التَّعْرِيفِ. And these topics, what has been mentioned here of these topics is just a mere mentioning with apparent definitions. مستغنية عن التمثيل, not needing examples for the simplicity that he presented. وحصرها متعسر, and gathering every single type without missing one is difficult. فلتراجع لها مبثوطاتها, and so let the expansive books be reviewed to catch all those different types of hadiths, all those different subjects in hadith. Wallahu al-muwaffiq wal-hadi, and Allah is the one who grants the compliance and He is the guide. La ilaha illahu, no one is God but He. And by that we completed the text of Nukhbat al-Fikar. That's just the metin without the sharh. So next week, inshallah ta'ala, we'll start reading the sharh, the whole explanation, which is a brief book also, like the text was brief. So I'm looking forward to that, inshallah ta'ala. Congratulations. If you finished the whole book, you took it. You took Nukhbatul Fikr. Alhamdulillah. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك